Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Zachary Hughes. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Zachary David Hughes was born on October 2, 1992, in the state of California. He went by the name Zach. He lived with his parents, David and Mindy Hughes, and his younger brother, Eli. When Zach was 11, the Hughes family moved to a small farm in Virginia. In 2005, Zach's parents adopted 5 orphans from Russia. The oldest, Grace, was 10. Years later, in a court filing, Zach made several claims about Grace. According to Zach, Grace would steal, lie, and demonstrate a lack of empathy. Zach believed that she was sociopathic. He found a notebook where Grace had documented plans to kill his parents. When Zach informed his parents about his discovery, they contacted social services. In response, Grace fabricated a story of mistreatment, and Zach's parents became the target of an investigation. Her accusations were not substantiated. Based on testimony that Zach would give later, it sounds like Grace was no longer a member of the Hughes family after this incident. In theory, this story about Grace is important because it afforded Zach the ability to recognize antisocial behavior. Now he knew what that behavior looked like. When Zach was a teenager, his family moved to South Carolina. By this time, he had already developed an aptitude for playing the piano and even won first prize at a piano festival. Later, he was admitted to the Juilliard School, where he earned a bachelor's degree in music. In 2018, Zach took his career in a different direction when he enlisted in the Marines. He was recommended to apply to Officer Candidate School, but fractured his legs and had to withdraw. In 2019, Zach returned to South Carolina, where he once again became active playing the piano. One time in August 2020, when Zach was performing on the streets of downtown Greenville, he met a man named John Joey Mello and John's daughter. I will refer to John's daughter as Jane, as in Jane Doe. She was around 8 years old at this time. In October 2020, Zach and John were celebrating Zach's birthday. Jane was with her mother, Christina Parcell, who also lived in South Carolina. She worked at a veterinary clinic. John mentioned how he worried about his daughter when she was alone with Christina and explained how when Jane returned, he would be moving to Italy with her. This is exactly what John did, even though his move was in violation of a court order. There wasn't much contact between Zach and John after the move, but they did communicate occasionally. In April 2021, John Mello surprised Zach with an alarming message. He said that Christina had come to Italy and brought Jane back to Greenville, South Carolina. Christina moved into a 2,100 square foot ranch house on 122 Canebrake Drive in nearby Greer, South Carolina. She lived there with her daughter Jane. Christina was engaged to a man named Bradley Eugene Post, who also spent time at the residence. Bradley was over 20 years older than Christina. John was stuck in Italy and unable to intervene. He told Zach that Christina's fiancé Bradley was a harmful individual who may have been interested in mistreating Jane. John also indicated that Christina was once a sex worker and advertised online. He supported this accusation by sharing clothing-challenged images of Jane, which were clearly designed for her to attract customers. Zach became concerned for the safety of John's daughter, Jane. When Zach looked at the images of Christina and contemplated her behavior, he was reminded of his experience with Grace many years earlier. Again, Grace was adopted by his parents and allegedly had antisocial traits. He came to believe that Christina was similar to Grace and therefore dangerous. In May 2021, Zach traveled to Italy to spend time with John. While he was there, John had online video calls with his daughter Jane. She had gained 20 pounds and did not appear to be enthusiastic. Zach was alarmed by her condition and was now very convinced that Christina was harming her. When he returned to Greenville in June 2021, he tried to intervene in a few different ways. For example, Zach contacted social services to report the alleged harmful behavior by Christina, but the agency took no action. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On October 13, 2021, at about 11 a.m., 41-year-old Christina Parcell was found murdered in her home. she was discovered in the living room by her fiancé, Bradley Post. Here is what the police found during the course of their investigation. Christina had sustained 35 sharp force injuries. The murder weapon was a knife. There were rose petals on the floor, not far from her body. A neighbor's doorbell camera captured a mysterious figure wearing all black entering Christina's house through the front door at 9:15 a.m. The police spoke to Christina's fiancé Bradley and seized his phone. On the phone, they discovered many inappropriate images of Jane. Based on the images, it appeared as though Christina was also an active and voluntary participant in the mistreatment. The alleged crimes had started in January 2018. On October 19, 2021, 6 days after the murder, the police arrested Bradley in connection with possessing those images. He was not charged in connection with Christina's death. The police had their sights set on someone else for the murder. Under Christina's fingernails, investigators found DNA belonging to Zach Hughes. On November 3, 2021, Zach was arrested and charged with Christina's murder. On February 11, 2025, his murder trial started. Zach decided to testify on his own behalf. He told the jury the whole story about how he met John Mello, became concerned about the way Christina was treating John's daughter, and had tried to intervene to protect Jane from her mother. By October 2021, Zach was unbelievably desperate and made the decision to kill Christina. On October 13, Zach parked his Ford pickup truck in Christina's neighborhood and rode a bicycle to her house. He approached her front door carrying a gift-wrapped box of roses. This was a tactic designed to deceive Christina. He wanted to make it appear as though he was there to deliver a box of flowers. When Christina opened the door, Zach told her that he had a delivery for her sister. When Christina indicated that her sister wasn't there, Zach produced a revolver, forced his way into the house, and closed the door behind him. He tried to knock Christina unconscious, but was unsuccessful. Zach decided to change tactics, and he stabbed Christina to death with a knife. During the attack, rose petals ended up on the floor. Zach realized that he had been scratched during the stabbing, so he used paint thinner in an unsuccessful attempt to destroy DNA under Christina's fingernails. The attack was not quiet. Zach became concerned that a neighbor may have heard the commotion. Therefore, he did not stay in the house longer to clean. Zach's defense had asked for the alleged mistreatment of Jane to be introduced at the trial. A key part of the defense strategy was that Zach killed in defense of another. He was only trying to protect Jane. The judge ruled against him, saying there was no imminent danger to Jane because she was not in the house when the killing took place. No mention of the mistreatment was permitted during the trial. While Zach was testifying, he said something about it anyway, which led to the judge immediately halting his testimony. Later, Zach was sentenced to 6 months in jail for contempt of court. On February 20, 2025, Zach Hughes was found guilty of murder, possession of a weapon during a violent crime, first-degree burglary, second-degree harassment, and second-degree conspiracy to commit harassment. He was found not guilty of first-degree harassment and first-degree conspiracy to commit harassment. The sentence he received for the convictions was a term of life in prison without the possibility of parole. 1 day earlier, on February 19, 2025, when the trial was still underway, John Mello was arrested and charged with accessory before the fact to a felony and solicitation to commit a felony. This may have been based on Zach claiming that John asked him 2 times in May 2021 if he would kill Christina for $5,000. Now moving to my analysis. Zach Hughes maintains his innocence, and he has a few supporters. They argue that he was acting in defense of another. Zach killed Christina to protect Jane. The state, of course, disagrees. They argue that the evidence supports the guilty verdict. The case was straightforward. Zach murdered a woman in her house by stabbing her repeatedly. No reasonable person would have believed that Christina represented a danger to anyone at that time. When I weigh the evidence in this case, I will include the alleged mistreatment of Jane, which of course the jury was not allowed to hear. This brings me to the question, was Zach guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that Zach was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. On the stand, Zach testified that he planned to kill Christina, disguised himself, drove to her neighborhood, rode a bicycle to her house, made entry into her house under false pretenses, threatened her with a revolver, attempted to knock her unconscious, stabbed her repeatedly with a knife, and tried to clean up the crime scene. When he perpetrated this homicide, Zach knew that Christina was alone in the house. He was aware that Christina was not a danger to anyone else at that moment. Zach's testimony sounds a lot like a confession to murder. Prior to the killing, Zach sent clothing-challenged images of Christina to various people. He made it seem as though he was trying to warn people about how Christina was a bad person, but his behavior seems more like harassment. If Zach was really concerned about Jane's well-being, what was the point of the harassment? How did that help anybody? Zach's behavior is more consistent with acting to advance an agenda that John Mello may have had. Like this was just a way for John to get back at Christina for the custody dispute. Moving to the exculpatory factors, based on the evidence that is available, one can make a good argument that both Christina and her fiancé Bradley committed terrible offenses against Jane over the course of years. Christina was not a nice person. As it turns out, she was quite dangerous. During a search of Christina's house, cocaine was discovered, which only supports the idea that the environment was not safe for her daughter Jane. One could also argue that Zach's homicidal behavior prevented Jane from further harm. He definitely put an end to the alleged criminal behavior. Prior to stabbing Christina to death, Zach attempted to use non-lethal means to stop her harmful behavior, like reporting her to social services. He did not immediately select homicide as his method to deal with the problem. If the authorities had stepped up and protected Jane, Zach would not have escalated to violence. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe that Zach Hughes was guilty of murder? There are two ways to look at this. Was he guilty beyond a reasonable doubt based on what the jury heard, and was he guilty based on everything that is known? Again, the jury was not allowed to hear the entire story about Jane. In my opinion, either way, Zach was guilty of murder beyond a reasonable doubt. When he killed Christina, she was not placing anyone in immediate danger. Christina may have been involved in an ongoing criminal scheme, but this did not give anyone the right to kill her. Now moving to the issue of Zach being denied the opportunity to introduce all the evidence in his defense. Did Zach really get a fair trial? In my opinion, no. I believe he is guilty, but I also believe he did not receive a fair trial. I think Zach should be given another trial where he can present a complete defense. His belief that Christina was committing serious crimes is critical to his motivation. It was a major part of his defense. If Zach somehow does get another trial, and I would be surprised if he did, his best hope would be a conviction for manslaughter. Maybe the jury would come to believe that this was some type of imperfect defense of another. Zach's homicidal behavior was criminal, but he meant well. In his mind, he was attempting to do the right thing. Now moving to the last question, what do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. For some reason, Zach became overly invested in the life of his friend, John Mello. He involved himself in something that was really none of his business. I think that John's main focus was revenge on Christina, but he realized that he could motivate Zach by claiming that Jane needed to be protected. Perhaps John was as good at playing Zach as Zach was at playing the piano. As it turns out, John may have been correct about Christina. She may have been a monster after all, but neither John nor Zach knew for certain what Christina was doing. Zach murdered Christina mostly based on John's word. From Zach's perspective, everything else that was uncovered after the murder was very fortunate for him, almost like it proved that he was correct all along. He could use that to say, hey, look, my behavior was justified after all. Unfortunately for Zach, he wasn't allowed to introduce the evidence at trial. There are many potential lessons in this case. For example, gullibility can be destructive. It's easy for some people to become enmeshed in other people's lives. But the main lesson is really about the use of force. Zach knew, or should have known, that he was not allowed to kill somebody who was not putting another person in immediate danger. No matter what else he wanted to believe or needed to believe about this convoluted situation, that knowledge should have been a safety barrier which prevented him from moving any further. Zach went overboard. His use of force was highly disproportionate to the hazards. At one time, Zach's fingers glided gracefully across ivory keys with precision and passion, but in his final act, the harmony gave way to fury, each stab landing like a discordant note in a symphony of violence. Those are my thoughts on the case of Zachary Hughes. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. The case of Zachary Hughes has been polarizing. People have strong reactions in opposite directions. Some people view the case like I do. They see Zach as someone who committed murder. Other people see this as a case of defense of another. They look at Zach as kind of a victim, like he was just trying to do the right thing. He was trying to prevent Christina and Bradley from doing whatever they may have been doing. I think both sides make good points. I think that there can be reasonable people on each side of the argument. It's easy to see this as a murder, but it's also easy to see the defense part. That can make sense at some level. I think the real concern here is the immediacy. That's what this case really came down to. The use of force to solve a problem that did not represent an immediate threat. I think the case really does hinge on that. Zach was acting as if he had no other recourse, like he was completely out of options. He had to escalate to murder to fix this problem. Now, as far as Zach getting involved in other people's business, that could be argued too. Maybe if there were more people like Zach, not the murder part, but the investment in what other people are doing, the world would be a better place. Maybe people like Jane would not be victimized as often if more people like Zach were around. They were paying attention. One could make that argument, but I think an argument can also be made that Zach was kind of creepy in a way. Like he was really way overinvested in whatever was going on with John Mello. Zach had a lot to live for. He had this incredible skill with the piano. He was going places. Why did he derail his whole life to get involved with whatever was going on with John? Zach had other options. He could have called the police. He could have continued to report the case to social services. He would have fulfilled his moral obligation. Like, he didn't need to feel guilty when he went to bed at night. This didn't need to keep him up. He could have simply taken actions to protect Jane, which were reasonable. Nobody would have thought less of him for it. But Zach, again, as I mentioned, went overboard. He went way too far and took this case in a direction that was absolutely unnecessary. The ultimate goal here would have been Christina being placed under arrest for her alleged offenses. The law never had an opportunity to deal with Christina because Zach dealt with her first. He took away her right to a trial. He took away all her rights. So Christina may have been a monster, but Zach went way too far when he killed her. Again, that's my opinion. I know there are many different opinions involving this case. It's a polarizing case that doesn't necessarily have any easy answers. Just a reminder that I have a Patreon account which contains over 300 pre-release videos. These videos are of the same quality as the videos that I make public. When I put a pre-release video in pre-release mode, it stays there for quite some time, usually several months, if not a year. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video.